Of the many Bankai revealed throughout Bleach, Madarame Ikkaku's Ryumon Hozakimaru remains to this day one of, if not the most surprising of them all. I mean, I certainly never expected him to have one, especially not back when it was revealed in the Urankar arc when he was still just a third seat. Characters of his station didn't have this kind of power. So for him to reveal a Bankai was a real shocking moment. And so it's not just unique that he has a Bankai in the first place, there's something really mythical about the way this Bankai is presented, the fact that Ikkaku wants to keep it a secret more than anything else, as he wants to continue serving underneath Kenpachi Zaraki until the day he dies, which is fascinating to me, because obviously the moment he learned Bankai, the moment he unlocked that power, he effectively became qualified to leave Zaraki's shadow and take up a position as captain should the need ever arise. And it's a really cool character internal conflict that Ikkaku has. In this video that I imagine will be fairly short, I want to take a look at Ikkaku's Bankai Ryumon Hozakimaru, the mythos surrounding it, that one time in the series that he did actually use it, what it is, what it can do, and my overall thoughts on the Bankai as well. And despite the fact that this Bankai is revealed way back at the start of the Urankar arc, there will be some spoilers for the 1,000-year Blood War arc ahead. And so yeah, Ryumon Hozakimaru does have this strange mythical feeling that makes it feel like something of a legendary Bankai. The fact that we only got to see it once throughout the entire story, despite having many other opportunities to do so. And so we got this unique sort of cat and mouse game with Ikkaku's Bankai, where whenever he got into a bad situation or even just a fight, we always kind of wondered, is he going to use Bankai? Are we going to see Ryumon Hozakimaru again? And the fact that we never did, I think actually Kubo deserves some plaudits for that, for showing some real restraint with this character. And because Kubo showed that restraint, I think even today, Ikkaku's Bankai remains special, and that reveal of his remains compelling. In some respects, I think the fact that Ikkaku wants to keep his Bankai a secret has even overshadowed the Bankai itself. It even sort of became a small point in the series as to who actually knows that Ikkaku has a Bankai or not. By the end, off the top of my head, I think the list is as follows: Yumichika, you've got Renji, Mayuri knows about his Bankai, Iba knows about his Bankai. It's implied, heavily implied, that Komamura overheard hearing about his Bankai as well, and then Ichigo finds out from Mayuri later on. So it's really still a very small number of people that actually know he can do this. So yeah, the fact that it is this secretive Bankai is one of the biggest aspects of Ryumon Hozakimaru. But actually, if we take a look at the Bankai itself, if we begin, of course, as we normally do with the Shikai, Hozakimaru is pretty simplistic, all things considered. Which again, I think fits Ikkaku really well. It's straightforward, it's all about getting up close and personal with the enemy, it's about melee combat. There's no real fancy bells and whistles, and I think all of that suits Ikkaku down to a T, but there is that underlying layer of deviousness to the Shikai as well. And while I don't think Ikkaku is necessarily devious, I think that extra layer is supposed to show you that this guy, although he throws himself headfirst into fights with an enormous dumb, toothy grin on his face, there's more to him than that. He isn't particularly stupid. Actually, there is that tactical layer to him as well, and I think that is well represented by the fact that the Shikai has a sort of secret, true nature to it as well. And perhaps you could even argue that the true nature, the true version of his Shikai, is a reflection of the fact that he has a Bankai that he is keeping concealed. But yeah, all things said, it is pretty simple. By slamming the hilt of his Zanpakuto into his Zanpakuto sheath, and Ikkaku, by the way, is really cool, I think, in the way he actively uses his sheath in combat. He can activate his Shikai with the phrase "Extend Hozakimaru," basically melding the katana with the sheath and turning them both into a lengthy spear. However, his Shikai can actually split apart into 3 distinct sections connected by a chain, enabling Ikkaku to control them with an additional degree of flexibility. Thanks to this heightened sense of control, these 3 sections are able to move so freely that Ikkaku can even begin to spin them like a flail. And then in the one instance we actually see him use Bankai in the battle against Grimjo's fraction Edurad Leones, When his Shikai is snapped in two, by slamming those two halves together, Ikkaku can activate his Bankai. And his Bankai takes on that notion of the three distinct sections of his weapon, each one connected by a chain, but expands on it massively and violently. But before we get into any of that, before we talk about the Bankai itself and how it's used in a fight situation, I need to talk about that actual reveal, that activation ritual, that process. Because in my opinion, even to this day, Ikkaku's Bankai reveal remains the quintessential Bleach Bankai reveal, easily one of, if not the best of all time. Despite Ikkaku not being a captain, he has, in my opinion, the Bleach Bankai reveal that would lay the groundwork for Bankai reveals to come. It has so many of the quote-unquote Bankai reveal tropes that I absolutely adore. Ikkaku is pushed to his absolute breaking point, you know, rather than simply using Bankai straight away as soon as the fight begins. Literally, Edrad gets him to the point of death before he finally activates it. I love the fact that he is there just barely holding up Edrad's hand. He is covered in blood. But you get that sense that he doesn't really want to be doing this, that he says, oh man, I can't believe I've been pushed this far, I really didn't want to have to use this thing. And it's that whole reluctance to use Bankai that, in my opinion, is so very quintessential. I absolutely love it. And as we would see in the Thousand Year Blood War, this would be replicated by characters like Kyoraku, who literally only use it as a last resort. And I think it's that idea of Bankai being a last resort rather than something a captain whips out every time they enter into a battle. I'm looking at you, Hitsugaya, Komamura, even Byakuya. This is exactly the sort of way I want a Bankai to be portrayed, and that's why to this day this is still one of the absolute best reveals in the series. In some ways, he actually mirrors Ichigo in this scene as well. Back when Ichigo first revealed his Bankai, the both of them are literally pushed to the brink, shredded, torn, soaked in blood, and buried at the foot of a crater as well. So it's kind of cool. I don't know if that was intentional on Kubo's part or not, probably, but it's still nice to see those two reflections in those characters. So in the same way as his Shikai is quite simplistic, so actually is his Bankai, but again, I quite like that. I think it does suit him really, really well. As noted by his opponent Edrad, it doesn't grant him any kind of extra abilities, any kind of defensive capabilities, no Kido powers, nothing like that. It just gives Ikkaku a massive, colossal burst of additional energy, of additional raw strength that allows Ikkaku to perform feats that he wasn't capable of doing before. For example, slicing through Edrad's massive arm in Resurrection where he couldn't earlier in the fight. Interestingly, from a visual standpoint, the Bankai seems to have something of a Chinese motif overall, with the weapons having a Chinese origin, and of course the massive red flaming dragon at the center point of the Bankai's design itself. But these colossal blades look absolutely fantastic, connected by enormous black chains and balanced out by huge pommels situated on the end of the enormous grips that Ikkaku uses to wield this new power. I like the look of this Bankai a lot. It's cool, it looks totally unlike anything else we've ever seen in the series, but it does still remain fairly faithful to what Hozakimaru was in its Shikai state. You can see how one became the other, even if Ryumon Hozakimaru does already appear to be on a totally different level, both in terms of design and lethality. According to Edrad, the burst of energy that Ikkaku gets from this Bankai leads to him having somewhat clumsy attacks overall. Ikkaku's Bankai is only used for a single chapter, which actually I think is kind of interesting, because some of the Bankai that we would get much later on in the series, say for example Kisuke Uraharu's, who would also only use his Bankai really for 1 or 2 chapters, that was kind of frowned upon. But actually back in the day, Bankai wasn't necessarily this thing that stretched across a multitude of chapters. It really was that one and done trump card, Hail Mary moment that if this fails, the battle is lost. And so I think that's kind of cool. I also think Kubo manages to cram in a good amount of detail in such a short amount of pages. For example, in this short space of time, Ikkaku manages to get across even some of Ryumon Hozakimaru's personality, saying that even when he activates Bankai, his Zanpakuto spirit is normally slumbering, and Ikkaku has to wake it up himself, normally by engaging in combat with an enemy, by trading blows with whoever it is he's fighting. Once Hozakimaru itself wakes up, the dragon crest on the massive axe portion of his Bankai begins to glow a simmering crimson, and we see that the dragon slowly begins to fill up with a light. This meter in the middle of Ikkaku's Bankai is probably the most unique thing about it, because while it doesn't give him any special abilities or powers or anything like that, this really is its one gimmick. As this light fills up in the center of this dragon crest, it indicates that Ryumon Hozakimaru is closer and closer to its maximum potential, its greatest destructive capability, and by the time that dragon crest is totally filled up with red light, the Bankai is at its strongest possible state. I actually think this is cool. Again, it's really nice characterization because it reflects two different things. One being, obviously, it showcases that the 11th Division has people that absolutely love to fight, and much like his captain before him, Ikkaku wants to drag out a fight for as long as he possibly can, and that is quite literally reflected in his soul, as his Bankai won't even allow him to use all of its strength until the fight has been going on for a decently long amount of time. But of course, Ikkaku can actually speed this up himself by spinning the gigantic axe above his head, the colossal blades flowing around him, charging this meter as he goes and getting it to speed up to reach that maximum potential faster. The other thing I think this showcases as well, however, is that burning passion that's found at the center of Ikkaku. On the surface, yeah, he kind of looks like a blunt tool, like something just made for fighting, but at his core, there is not only a good man, a strong officer, but that absolute burning desire for a great fight. And I think that is really showcased here in the visuals of his Bankai, with that simmering, almost like steaming, boiling hot dragon at the center of the weapon itself. And so once that dragon is filled up, Ikkaku can actually wield that massive axe portion of the Bankai for a more devastating strike. And so that's pretty much it for Ikkaku's Bankai on the surface. It is really awesome. It looks great. I love the visuals. I think it looks really imposing with these wicked, menacing-looking blades that Ikkaku can seemingly control with ease, showcasing his immense physical strength and endurance, the gigantic chains hanging off them, the way he can wield them with seeming ease, causing immense damage to his opponent, but at the same time he is building charge. His Bankai almost feels like something straight out of a video game, the fact that he is literally building energy and power. The more he fights, the more damage he does, but if he gets an opening, he can actually charge that gauge himself. So I love his Bankai and kind of everything that comes with it. However, the 1000-Year Blood War arc opens up this Bankai to some scrutiny, I think, in my opinion, and makes it look, actually, kind of useless. It makes this Bankai appear to be ultimately really fragile. Ikkaku's Bankai, while being really cool, does feel very delicate, and it definitely feels like it comes from an era where Kubo hadn't yet decided that if a Bankai is damaged or broken in any way, that Bankai can never be repaired. When Ichigo's Tensa Zangetsu is snapped in half like a twig by Yugrum Hashwoth, it cannot be fixed. The only way for him to get Tensa Zangetsu back is to completely reforge it. And yet, in this fight, Ikkaku's Bankai is being completely devastated left, right, and center. One of his blades is almost completely ruined after a single attack from Edrad, which in the context of the 1000-Year Blood War arcs reveals is absolutely ridiculous. Ikkaku trained for however long to get this power, and then it's rendered almost totally useless and worthless after clashing one time with the enemy. So for me, that definitely does feel a little bit strange. And not only that, but after their absolute final clash, which results in Edrad's death, one of Ikkaku's weapons is completely ruined. There's nothing left but the handle, which implies that after this fight, Ikkaku's Bankai is now utterly worthless to him. Supposedly, Akon was able to at least restore the Bankai's visual appearance, but to me that just doesn't seem right at all. Now, on the one hand, I like the idea of Ikkaku being reckless and diving into a battle headfirst without really thinking about the consequences, and him having to pay a pretty hefty price for that. I like the fact that him having this joyous ecstasy for fighting doesn't come without cost, and that he doesn't get away with it all the time, and it's unfortunately his Bankai that's had to pay the price. But at the same time, it really diminishes, in many ways, the point of Bankai, the effectiveness of it, if it is totally useless after one battle. Now, I kind of get it, maybe if it is supposed to be a Shinigami's trump card, Ikkaku had to pull it out or else he would have died, and it saved his life, so I suppose at the end of the day it did its job. But for a Shinigami who, trains for tens to hundreds of years, who lives for even longer, to acquire that ultimate power only to have it completely destroyed in one fight feels like a bit of a cruel joke. It is possible, however, presuming Ikkaku is still fairly young, presuming he still has some way to go in his training, maybe his Bankai isn't complete yet, but there's no way to know for sure. And it's not like Kubo even pulls back on this either. He actually uses Ikkaku's Bankai as an example in the 1,000-Year Blood War arc of one that has been pretty much destroyed beyond repair. So to me, that seems like a crazy limitation to place on Bankai purely for the sake of a plot point for Ichigo to get him a new Bankai, to get him to go to the Royal Palace. And I mean, I guess that's why maybe we never see Ikkaku's Bankai again. Kubo doesn't really elaborate on it too much. He basically says that Mayuri can get away with it because he modifies his Bankai, modifies in quotation marks, rather than having it actually break. And two, Komamura has this really close-knit bond with Tenken, with his Bankai Kokujo Tengen Myo, and so because of that, he can get away with his Bankai being injured. It will just heal itself over time. Which again feels like a bit of a get-out clause for Kubo because Kokujo Tengen Myo was completely destroyed at least a couple of times in the Fate Karakura Town, whether it was sliced down the middle by Aizen or had its chest caved in by Tozen. So Kubo kind of had to write his way out of that, but actually I think that one works really well because we know they do have that link in the fact that literally Komamura just moving his arm will move the Bankai's arm, so that's absolutely fine. But it definitely does feel like Mayuri is having to, shall we say, science his way out of the fact that his Bankai was bisected by Uryu during their battle. And so yeah, it just feels like a huge crippling weakness for characters like Ikkaku to have to deal with, which is pretty fascinating but also a bit of a shame. But that's pretty much everything about Ikkaku's Bankai Ryumon Hozakimaru. It is pretty simple, it goes really well with the character who is all about close quarters, tight-fisted fighting, getting up in your opponent's face, getting bloodied at the same time, and Ryumon Hozakimaru seems to go really well with that. It has a great visual design, but does seem to be pretty delicate, and it might be that Ikkaku has now cost himself the use of his Bankai forevermore. That's it for the video, guys. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of Ikkaku's Bankai Ryumon Hozakimaru? Are you as sweet on the reveal itself as I am? What do you think of its seemingly crippling fatal flaw and the fact that his Bankai may never be able to be used again? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't done already. A massive shout out and thank you goes out to each and every one of the patrons supporting this channel. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, guys, I'll catch you later. I'll see you then.